So let me get started with one story. And I tell you this story because it illustrates something called a ride along. And if you've ever heard about a ride along, you might have heard about it in the example of police officers. So police officers will sometimes bring along the kind of people they bring tend to be journalists or politicians, somebody they want to influence. And what they'll do is they'll just have somebody sit in the front seat of the patrol car and they drive around doing their normal police job. And they say, look how difficult it is. We need more resources. We need more here. We need to do something. They're kind of making a case to that person and giving them the direct experience. And so you might read a news article about somebody riding along. Well, I'm a big, big fan of engineers riding along with sales. And this is the first technique that I would suggest, and it kind of illustrates some of the issues that tend to come up. So I was doing this, and I made a practice of doing this. I had my engineers do it. I did it for larger clients at a medium-sized fintech company, and we were going to go sell to Citigroup. I think they're called Citi these days, but giant bank that begirdles the globe and has bazillions of employees and more money than God and so on. Giant organization. We were, by comparison, very, very tiny. And so there was a big sales operation, big sales meeting in New York. So I got on a plane, and because I don't travel very well, I went the day before. And everybody else who was coming from our company, except for one guy who lived in New York, they all were also getting on the plane the next day, but we had a snowstorm, which in Britain, and I'm not sure where everybody is, but in Britain, a snowstorm is like 1 inch of snow, like a teeny weeny small couple centimeters. Everything stops. No airplanes go anywhere. So all my colleagues were back in the UK, and they could not get on there were no planes coming. So it's me and one sales guy in New York, which I think it was my first or second visit. So he drove me around, he got me to the right place, and he said, okay, Squirrel, we got to sell to these guys here at Citi. And they showed me into a room, which I am not kidding, looked like if you've ever seen President Putin, when he meets somebody, he sits at one end of a table, and somewhere on the other side of the planet, a huge distance away, is the other person at the other end of this table. This was how big this table was. So we came into this room, and there was, of course, supposed to be more of us, but it was just me and the one salesman. And he was very nervous. He was like, oh, I don't know how you're going to do this, Squirrel. You never did this before. I said, I'm not sure either. And we sat at one end of the table, and then the Citi people sat at the other. And eventually we figured out that was kind of dumb, so we moved up. And they were bringing along their whatever it's called, their CTO. So it was a CTO for all of Citi, this kind of big honcho, big important guy. But he didn't show up at first, right? I think this is a bit of a power play. He wanted to show off that he was important and he didn't have to wait for us and that kind of stuff. And so he eventually turned up about half an hour late. And we discussed all kinds of things about the product we were going to sell them and why it would be beneficial. But everybody was just making time till this guy showed up. And so he eventually comes in, and we're still, pretty far down the table. So it's a pretty long distance. We're kind of shouting over to each other. And he comes in and he sits down at the head of the table, of course, being the most important guy. And he sits down and he starts rooting around. He reaches in his pocket and he's looking around and he can't find a pen. So I picked up a pen that I happened to have, and I walked around the table, which took a while. It was not a short process to get around the table to where he was. And I handed him a pen, but I hadn't even introduced myself or anything. They were just chatting among themselves, and I handed him a pen. He said, thanks. And he started using the pen. And then he started grilling me. And he asked me all kinds of really tough questions, and I gave him very engineer answers, I now can see. He asked, how big's your company? We never deal with companies that are smaller than $1 trillion. And I said, we're not $1 trillion. Should we leave? He said, oh, okay, stick around. So by going back and forth with him and answering him, he hadn't touched a line of code in 20 years. So he was CTO in a management sense only. But by giving him good technical answers and good meaningful business answers, I really won him over. And we did sell this business, so that was a great success. And all the people in the UK were on tenterhooks. They were all nervous, thinking, "Oh my gosh, how's Squirrel going to do?" I actually turned out to be okay. Now I also got a heck of a lot of help from the salesperson sitting next to me, who would poke me and tell me what to say and help me out a lot. I learned a ton that day. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you the best part. He walks out, and when he's finished, he says, okay, fine, we'll buy it. You guys work out the details. And he leaves and he goes out the door. And then he comes back a minute later and he throws me the pen. It was quite a distance. You know, he throws me the pen and I caught it. And I thought that was a good result. And then he goes off on his merry way to do more of what he does. Anyway, the point of this story is that whether we had sold it or not, it was tremendous learning for me. I understood that, for instance, they really thought that they wanted to deal with really large organizations. We had to play up. We had to look like we were more professional than we really were. I understood that they were a giant organization that had tables Putin size, right? And that their interactions with us would be that sort of interaction. There was all that kind of knowledge, that implicit knowledge that I would never get from a requirements document, from a dialogue with our own salespeople. I couldn't have got it any other way. And then I had an awful lot more empathy for that poor guy who was there in New York all by himself. You know, all the rest of us were in the UK. He was our only US salesperson, and he was dealing with companies like this all the time with insufficient support from us. It was very clear that he needed better information, you know, more people like me sitting next to him giving information while he was trying to sell. Huge learning. And my question to you is, how many times do your engineers meet customers? How many times do they ride along with salespeople? My guess is not very often. And the thing you can also do if you were to start thinking about doing some ride-alongs is you build the same kind of empathy for the salesperson. So in my story, one thing I made sure to tell you was I understood that guy who was sitting next to me a lot better. And when I understood his issues better, instead of just thinking of him as a random factor who was producing extra work for me, which is what I used to think, I had appreciated, hey, he's dealing with, he's sitting at the end of this long table. He's dealing with these tough people who are grilling him. I need to support him more. So empathy internally is as important as empathy for. So you're doing the first thing, which is really good, which is asking to participate. And whether or not they say yes, the fact that you're exhibiting interest and you're showing up and being willing is definitely helpful. The next thing I'm going to describe goes from them to you. So it's kind of like a ride along on the tech side. And that might help as well, but they may not want to do that either. If that's the case, then there's probably a breakdown of trust. And there's something I'm going to cover later called test-driven development for people, which can really help with building trust. How many of you, and you don't have to answer this, just answer in your head, how many of you have ever had a salesperson, if you're on the sales side, you've done this, or you're on the tech side and you've had a salesperson come and visit you and read some code? Has that ever happened? My prediction is all of you are going, what? What do you mean? How could the salespeople possibly read anybody's code? Well, there's a particular type of code which salespeople can actually read if you write it well, and you should be writing it this way anyway. And that code is the code that does automatic testing of your software. Now, I'm a big fan, and some of you have heard me talk about this before, of having product managers and people like that read those tests because they can give you really good feedback. Customer service people are also good at that. And you say, wait a minute, it's going to have ifs and threads, and it's going to have variable names and all kinds of other stuff they're not going to understand. That's fine, because the title of the test, the name of the test, the function name, should be, if you're writing your tests well, actually readable. But the thing you should be able to do for any human being who knows the domain, and who knows your domain better than your salespeople, they're out there banging on the doors all day, just like Andres was saying. They're out there doing it, so they should be able to read the test and understand what it does. If they can't, you have a problem in your tests, so go fix that. But if you can set things up so that your salespeople actually come and look at some code, they'll think it's so strange that they may actually be curious. What the heck? How could I understand it? You know, you guys are weird wizards over here. You sit them down at your computer and you show them what the actual code says, and you say, is this what customers want? Do customers want to run this report and set it up to go every day? No, actually. I'm always talking to them. They say they never read the reports. What they really need is a graph that shows them when there are spikes and what they should do. Huge learning for you. You want your product manager there probably also to help with that learning and get it into your system. But the thing that they can learn is that it's actually possible for them to interact with the software. Now, the other thing you're probably already doing, I wanted to tell you the most radical one first, is demonstrating your software. If you're not frequently doing that, The thing that you can do is, of course, demonstrate what the software does. But the thing is, you could show the tests to people, and you can also show your designs to people before the software is written and before it's actually working. You say, I'm going to make it do this. No, my God, don't do that. Oh, I would love it if it would do this other thing. Well, actually, it already does that. Let me show you the test for that. When you get that kind of dialogue going, the salesperson can often feel like they have much more control over the code. A feeling that I always want to create in everybody working with code is more like a potter. If you've ever watched a potter throwing a pot on a wheel, the wheel's going around and around and they're moving it around, and you notice that they kind of push in on it and they say, oh no, that's too narrow. And then they pull out again and it changes, and they feel like they can change it as it's being created. Whereas way too often we make software feel like you are pouring metal into a mold and you can't change the mold, right? You just got the mold, you liquefy the metal, you pour it in, you wait for it to cool, and you get your pot out. And it's an iron pot, and it's a real good pot, I'm sure, but you can't change your mind halfway through. You can't say, I want to do something different. And if you can get that kind of flexibility and malleability in your conversation with the salespeople, they'll be much more engaged. They'll see that, oh, this is something that I can change as I'm working with it. There's a whole lot more in this area. And if you want to look at my stuff on Elephant Carpaccio and so on, you can make this kind of a business-wide experience where you're constantly reviewing, engaging, figuring out what you want to change. And what we're often guilty of on the tech side is not inviting enough people in to have that discussion with us. And if we can do that, if we can create that environment, it really helps. There are these new kinds of tools, and really they're quite old. The very first one was Excel, that people call low code. I remember working on one around 2000, so they're not that new. And in fact, Excel is kind of the grandfather of all of them. People love to grab Excel, put all kinds of crazy stuff in it. You see this in fintech all the time, and they make Excel sheets that are horrendous beasts and nobody can maintain them. They got errors in them, but they make stuff and they get them something out. So another thing you can do if your environment allows this, building nuclear power plants probably don't do this, but if you can put in something that allows people in the rest of the business, even customers, to adjust things, to configure, to change how the software is working, to write their own little code to do something, then that really builds trust with them, and you could be doing that as well. Absolutely. Well, product managers and project managers who have that kind of background or that ability, who have even written code themselves, have a tremendous advantage. That's a great thing. There are also wonderful ones who don't have that skill. But for bridging the gap, which is what we've been talking about, product managers and project managers and people like that who sit in the middle do a tremendous job, and it's great if they can do some of each. So sometimes get fantastic product leaders who come from some part of the business. They're operational. They've actually done it. They come from a big customer and they really know it. I had somebody who did this. He was helping design APIs, design programming interfaces really well for other programmers because he had been an early adopter at one of their customers of the software. So he was dealing with the ugly, horrible, difficult to use software. And he said, oh, if you just did this, we could do it better. So they brought him in and they said, great, you be in charge. You tell us how we change this so it will be more usable for developers at our customers, and they can hook into it and make it work for them and have it help them with their problems. And if you can get somebody like that who is energetic and engaged and giving a lot of feedback, then they can give feedback both directions. They can say, this will really help you with this kind of problem that you have over here on sales, and it will really help you engineers to get more adoption, to get a better API and better outcomes. I would strongly encourage looking for people who can either use those skills. Some of my best product managers have been former coders, or people can develop them, in whether that's in low code or reading tests or something else. If they can get to be engaged vigorously in the development process, then they're very naturally going to react differently. You're going to have much greater empathy if you're part of the process. There's people who have an amazing skill, and their skill is that they can take out their pocket watch and they can wave it in front of a customer just like this. They have this amazing hypnotical power. And you might think, gosh, I really want those. Where are they? You probably have them in your business today. The typical name for them, the role they will have, the kind of thing on their business card, is account manager. And they sit in a funny place. So what they are not is salespeople, so they don't go out and knock on the doors and find LinkedIn profiles and show up with pitch decks. They come in later in the process, but they're typically involved before a sale is closed, and they're part of the negotiation of the sale when the company starts to get interested and says, "Oh boy, this would be good to work with." But finance isn't going to be so happy, or we're really going to have trouble with our internal IT. They're never going to want to adopt this. That's when your company can have an account manager who gets to know all the power players, who gets to know all the good committees, who gets to know who's out and who's in, and who to listen to and who not to. And I'm going to give you an example of such a person in a minute. And what this account manager can do looks to us engineers like that hypnosis. They don't really have a stopwatch. They don't really have a chain. They don't really hypnotize anybody. But what they do is they show up and they say, wait a minute, you're delivering this to the internal IT, and of course they're opposed because you're going to replace them. So don't deliver it to them anymore. Instead, come and demonstrate it to the head of sales, come and demonstrate it to the person in charge of operations, whose business is going to be made much easier, whose profit and loss will change as a result of this. So as part of this sales process, demonstrate it to the right person, take it to the right committee, take the right action. And by doing that, it looks to us engineers like somebody's been hypnotized. In fact, what happens is simply somebody really understands the customer. And then, of course, something happens the other direction, which is as salespeople are in there trying to close the sale, trying to make it happen, trying to figure out the right provisions to put in the contract and so on. You've got an account manager who knows all the ins and outs, who is really good at communicating back to your company. They're kind of like a great ambassador. They can speak both languages. Then they can go back and forth and explain, hey, wait a minute, what they actually need is this. Now, they're going to tell you they need one of these, but just don't listen to them. I got that covered. I know which committee to go to, but they're going to tell you they need this one, and that we have to listen to. So we really need to build the new authentication. We don't have to worry about the additional database. That's the sort of thing that your account manager can help with. Yeah, titles are very misleading, both in a sales process when you're trying to sell to somebody and they have, they turn out to be a very influential associate vice president of nothing. You can be looking for somebody to be an account manager and they won't have that title. So, for example, I was just this afternoon chatting to a company in which they really need account managers. It's really vital to them that they get a greater understanding of their very large customers. It's like me with Citi, very small company, very big customers. And knowing the ins and outs is vital. And they have people doing it, but it's their part-time job. And part of my advice to them was make it their full-time job, because these people are good at it. And it's something that's vital to you because you will save months, years of effort not building something you don't need to and building something that customers don't want. So these account managers can make a huge difference in bridging this gap, in being the translator, in helping the engineers to deliver things that customers actually want and that salespeople actually need for their demos and for their next sales, and helping the engineers actually understand what the salespeople are doing. And because they're part of, very frequently, if it's done well, the contracting process, one of the biggest breakdowns is when the engineers say, oh yeah, you signed the contract, but you never asked me. Wait a minute, I can't build that. What are you doing? You avoid that if you have an account manager right there at the hinge, right there involved in the process. Now, I want to tell just one more story, which is about the same company that I was describing, the one where we sold to Citi, but this time I'm going to Boston and not to New York, because we bought a company in Boston, and so we were absorbing them and getting to their customers and understanding what was going on. And they had a really big customer who was right there in Boston. And we, again, were way over here in the UK, and we were quite distant from them. And our understanding, especially in the technology team, of what those folks needed was very limited. And we weren't doing a very good job with them. But what we did is we sent one of our engineers who was interested in, becoming more customer focused. So he really loved coding, but he said, okay, I won't code anymore. What I'm going to do is be a customer engaged person. And also my family wants to move to Boston. So we put him on a plane to Boston. And we said, your job is to understand this customer and walk the corridors and really understand everybody. And boy, did he do an amazing job. He had a little bit of mentoring from some very senior salespeople, but he got his head around who the power players were, and he kind of became an account manager. Now, this is rare, but I just wanted to tell you the story of this guy because he's absolutely amazing, did a fantastic job for us, and he could hypnotize like nobody's business. No, he did a fantastic job of it. And just to inspire some of the rest of you, I also have an amazing project manager who did a super duper job, kind of the canonical project management job, and then as his side job, also understood the customer well, was the person we could go to get features quietly moved off to the side so that we could build something that the customer actually needed and that we needed. So you can come from many sources, and you don't actually have to have it written on your business card. What you want is to find the people who can do the job and then give them the job, and it makes a huge, huge difference. Okay, I was writing on the forum about a new word that I learned recently called aporia, which is this kind of state of unknowing. And it's so important and helpful to be in that state where you don't know what's happening, and you have to remind yourself to go back there and start in that state of aporia, start in that doubtful state, and ask these questions. And if you need help with that, ask on the forum, ask me, and read some of the stuff about TDD for people, because I think it'll really help. You don't play dumb. It's not that you say, I pretend that you don't know anything. You say, I've heard this from you before, but I'm not sure I understood it. So could we just start over again? Unless you have telepathy. Anybody on this call has telepathy? I got a startup we can run. It's going to involve horse racing. It's going to be great. I'm going to finish with a story. And yet another of my tales of woe from history. I had, this is the time when I was CTO at an e-commerce company, and I had somebody who wasn't in sales, she was in buying, but it was the same kind of thing, that she was going out to people outside and she was getting stuff for us to sell. That was her job. But she had to sell people on the reason that they should buy from us. So although she was paying the money, it was very much a sales activity. And she had a team of buyers who knew the fashion industry deeply. You can see how much the fashion industry rubbed off on me. But she would send off these folks who did sales type activities. And I got to know her. She was quite a diminutive person and a little bit wide, but the most effective and vigorous sort of person you could imagine. So you did not want to be on the bad side of her. And so I did a lot of TDD for people with her to understand what the issues were for buyers and what they needed from our system so that they could enter the new products in, they would show up on our system, they could sell them, then they would earn a commission like a salesperson and so on. I really got to understand through this process what was important to her. And I had my engineers spend time with them and go to buying conventions and things like this so we could get as much information and understanding as possible. And then this really paid off. Because one day, one of my engineers, and he hadn't quite got the memo, hadn't quite got through to him, he said, I'm only partway through the wedding sale, and I'm not done. It's Friday. I'm going to go to the pub. We'll finish this up on Monday. And so the product manager announced to the buying person, who was on the other end of a gigantic room, but somehow I'm in gigantic mode today. I don't know why, but we had this giant opens plan room, and so I could see the buyer at the other end. And I could see the message go from the product manager to her. And she stood up to her full height, which wasn't very high, and she walked to the center aisle and she started marching. And it was like Godzilla, the whole building was shaking as she was coming down. She was like, because this guy had buzzed off. The product manager, I knew this probably wasn't going to go over, but the product manager had gone ahead before asking me. And so she's just marching down the aisle, coming to get us. And so I was able to kind of go meet her halfway, literally, and say, hey, actually, we know this is a problem. I've already phoned him because I was phoning as I walked out. Come back from the pub. You got to build this, because what you don't want to do is make brides wait until May to buy stuff for weddings. You want to put your stuff up in April, right? Or earlier. So the timing is very, very important. And that was what she was marching down to tell us. And it was because I'd put in that time that I was able to do that. And it was because, to his credit, that engineer understood, oh, okay, this is for a wedding. I didn't quite understand that. Yeah, I can see that. Because he had done the interaction before, that he could get it. And then understand he should come back from the pub and build it. And we got the sale live and it was all okay. But the other thing that had happened was she had respect for us. So she may have been marching down with fire on her face, but she understood that we knew what was important to her and that we were going to listen to it. And so she wasn't surprised when I was walking up and saying, yeah, I just called him. He's on his way back. So I just wanted to illustrate for you how it's possible to have conflict. That was a very productive conflict. It led to a very good result, which was we actually could sell things to brides. And you can have that conflict between sales and tech in a very productive and effective way. And I hope these techniques, like having a ride-along, having them participate in coding, having account managers, and doing TDD for people, I hope that's been helpful to you guys in developing that kind of rapport. We'll have some new exciting stuff coming, possibly after a short break. And of course, I'd love to see you on the forum, where I'll have links and ideas and comments on these items, so you can pick up on some of this afterwards. Have a wonderful day. Thanks, everyone, for coming.